The self is obviously very, very important. However, I'd probably say that it's more to do with our knowing the person in front of us has multiple personalities. So any approach that does not maybe take into account that somebody has those multiple personalities, has parts and has self, for me is always going to be fundamentally flawed or lacking. So it's really everything changes when you're aware that people have parts. That's what really causes the paradigm shift that Richard Schwartz would talk about. I'd say that's the key thing.
Okay, I'm joined here by Gayle Williamson. Gayle is an IFS therapist. She's based in Dublin in Ireland. Gayle, do you want to just, to get started, can you just give us a bit about your background and tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure. Um, well, I'm glad to be here, first of all. I always love any opportunity to talk about IFS. Um, so I used to be a journalist and I retrained um, about 20 years ago now. And I trained as a psychotherapist and um, trained in various approaches. Um, I set up as a private psychotherapist in Dublin. Um, and fortunately, I did discover IFS several years ago, and that's pretty much all I do these days. I'm an IFS psychotherapist. I also teach IFS now. I run workshops and trainings. I try to write about it when I get time. I'm very, very passionate about it. So
That's fantastic. And I'm just curious, what caused the shift from journalism over into the world of psychotherapy?
uh, I think just the world of journalism was really changing at the time. And it probably wasn't a natural fit for me from the start. So I was very glad when I started just exploring what else I might do. And I did a psychology degree, first of all, and I definitely found what fitted for me. So,
Amazing, amazing. And you tried quite a few different approaches, and then you seem to have found your home with IFS. What about IFS really, why did this feel right for you? Like, why did this seem like the right thing to really zone in on and really master?
yeah, I think in common with most therapists, I would say, um, it is obviously part of being a therapist that you do CPD, continuing professional development training every year in order to keep up your accreditation. So inevitably you end up doing lots of different courses. And I certainly did that. I trained and I did extra training in CBT and mindfulness, sensory motor psychotherapy. And I think that I was always searching for something that would finally make me feel equipped, like fully equipped when I was with clients. Um, just, yeah, I would say that's a very common experience as a therapist, that search for something that's going to make you feel equipped when you're with somebody who's really overwhelmed or very resistant and never quite finding it. And I came across different things that were parts related, like the structural dissociation model that Gillian Fisher would talk a lot about. Tried to implement aspects of that, and thankfully, I did come across IFS because um, it is a complete model, and I'd say pretty much from the word go, it made sense to me. It made me feel like any questions I had were answered. But it's that feeling of being equipped as a therapist that when I take on a new client, I don't have any I don't have any apprehension now about am I going to be able to offer this person something useful? Am I going to be able to deal with whatever they're bringing me? And I don't say that from any kind of arrogance or anything like that. But IFS really does just give you that confidence that no matter who walks into your room, you're going to have something useful to offer them, and you're going to know what to do. Um, I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that. But
And do you think that's because IFS is in some sense directed by the client and doesn't, you're essentially letting the client's self with a capital S sort of guide the process. And whereas other therapies might be more dependent upon the therapist themselves. Am I getting that right? Or is that
um, well, the self is obviously very, very important. Um, However, I'd probably say that it's more to do with um, our knowing that the person in front of us has multiple personalities. So any approach that does not maybe take into account that somebody has those multiple personalities, has parts and has self, um, for me is always going to be fundamentally flawed or lacking. So it's really everything changes when you're aware that people have parts. That's what really causes the paradigm shift that Richard Schwartz would talk about. Um, I'd say that's the key thing.
that's a really good point. And how has your own internal experience of life changed since you discovered IFS? What was it like before and then afterwards? Like for my in my own case, for example, after I started doing a bit of this work and work with a therapist and sort of in this regard, I find my day-to-day experience of life, I just feel a lot more content, a lot more at peace, and I can relate to these different parts of me in a way that is sort of better for the whole system of Nile, if that makes sense. And it just works. So I'm just curious, what's it been like for you?
Oh, I think it changes everything. So it changes how fundamentally how I am as a therapist, but it also changes so much in my personal life. And so if I give you an example, I'm speaking to you as a perimenopausal woman. I'm one of those women who commonly would have a very angry part that will come with being perimenopausal. And I can imagine that previously there would have been a lot of perhaps shame over that, a lot of criticism of myself, um, and knowing that that's a part of me, it's a very valuable part of me. And sometimes, yeah, it doesn't maybe have a lot of nice things to say, but it's also coming from a very valid place. It's a very important part of me. And so things like that, where I'm not just in that angry part, feeling like I'm a terrible person. I know that I have an angry protector part of me, and I know that it's there for very good reason. So it's I suppose shifts in perspective like that. Um, I don't know if that fully answers that, but
No, it does. It does. It sounds like there's just more of an awareness that these elements exist within. And because you have that awareness, you can relate to them in a different way and maybe not be fully engrossed by the shame or the anger or whatever it is. And you're just aware it's there. And what do you think about Richard Schwartz? He wrote a book called No Bad Parts, and he has this belief that all of these parts are in some ways adaptive, they're all maybe just immature, but they're all trying to serve a function for the overall system. And then you have other people that sort of suggest and different approaches. Like I know a guy that I really respect that does schema therapy and chair work, and he says no, there are bad parts. So I want to get your thoughts on this.
So I would strongly agree with Richard Schwartz that there are no bad parts. Um, and really being able to know that and understand that is so useful as a therapist, but also personally. So what we know about parts is that um, obviously we have two main categories of parts. So we have our exiles that um, really their function in the system is to carry all our pain, uh, the trauma, the negative beliefs that we have. They carry all of that in order that the rest of our system isn't overwhelmed by all of that pain. So that's what they do. And then we have our protectors, we have our managers, and we have our firefighters. And the managers, their main job is to try as best as they can to keep the exiles out of our awareness. They don't always succeed, but that's what they're trying to do. And then with our firefighters, that whenever the exiles do manage to get past the managers, that's when the firefighters will jump in. Um, the firefighters, they love any kind of soothing, comforting kind of strategies, like drink, drugs, sex, anything, scrolling on our phone. Our managers can be the really critical parts of us. They're very hardworking. Um, they will keep us going no matter what, So no matter what stress we might be under, they're the parts that keep us going. Um, so the protectors sometimes don't have uh, a very good impact on us. So obviously the effect of the critic, where somebody has a very harsh critical part that calls them useless, um, swears at them, really gives them a hard time. Um, or we have the firefighter who lashes out in rage. Um, we have parts that will, even take part in criminal behavior or whatever it might be. Um, the impact of our parts can be really damaging. But when we say no bad parts, what we're talking about is the intent of the protector parts in particular. Um, and what we would know is that they always have a good intent for the person that they're protecting. So to give an example of that, the critical part, um, even though it might be really harsh and shaming, it's typically trying to help the person by either really pushing them to be better somehow, to work harder, be better, um, or it's maybe trying to make somebody feel so bad that they will just hide away. They won't do anything. They won't take any risks. They won't change anything. So there's that good intention there behind what it does. Um, uh, I guess the exception, and it's not really an exception, I'm not sure it's the right word, but there are no bad parts, but there are other things that can get into our system, which may not be bad, may not be good. Um, uh, it's something that's not really spoken about much in IFS, but um, a really great guy called Robert Falconer, he's really the expert in this area, but there are certain energies that can get into our system, which they are bad. They can be kind of dark and bad, but they're not parts. That's the distinction. They're not parts. Um, Otherwise,
So these are almost things that might be sort of in the collective consciousness, and they can enter the human psyche and have a destructive effect.
that's it. They can really be, yeah, uh, they can really have quite a difficult effect on the person and the people around them. Um, I'm not sure that I'm the best person to really speak to about that. I have had some experience of it, but just maybe to be aware of that distinction, that there are other things that can get inside of our system. That Bob Faulkner would say, for instance, that we like to think that maybe we're very contained as people, that nothing can get in or out, but actually we are very permeable and energies can get into us. Um, and it's kind of difficult in a way to talk about things like this because naturally we all have skeptical parts that might be a little bit wary about talk of some kind of evil entities getting into us. Um, but if there's one thing that I've learned about IFS and us as human beings, it's that there's so much that we don't know about ourselves, so much that is mysterious, fascinating. Um, I guess it's our figuring out parts that like to think that we have ourselves figured out. But actually, I don't think that's quite the case.
If we were having this conversation about 7 years ago before I started the weekend university, I would have just been like, no way, that is totally not possible. But not, now, after exploring psychology, consciousness, all these different subjects for the past 7 years and speaking to all these different experts in these areas, like that to me is a very, very valid claim. And that I would say there's probably a lot to that, you know. I'm actually going to look up Robert Faulkner to see if
Very, very interesting guy. Yeah, and he would also talk about spiritual guides, which I would say any IFS therapist is very familiar with. That you regularly have spiritual guides come in and help with the work. So, um, mm.
um so something I've never actually asked anybody about before, but what might assessment look like in IFS? So imagine I was to walk into your therapy room, like how would we start working together? Like how do you assess a client in IFS? Like what does that process actually look like?
Sure. So, uh, I guess there's no one size fits all. But so everybody is different. There are some people where uh, I can start working with their parts from the first session. Um, most people that contact me these days would contact me for IFS, and most people that would come to me now, they have some understanding already, and they're very keen to jump in and start working with parts. So often we will do that, really quite quickly. For the most part, probably I'm doing what I always would have done as a therapist, where I'm still taking a history from somebody um, to get a brief understanding of where they're coming from, the key things that might have happened to them in their lives. Um, from the word go, however, I would be talking to them in parts. That is just I guess, part of how I speak now. And I want to do whatever I can from the word go to really get the person thinking and talking about themselves in terms of parts. So I will likely start naming different parts that I'm hearing. And, I will just gradually start saying, I hear a part of you feels this way, or a part of you thinks XYZ. Um, and then at some point, I will maybe, if I have the opportunity, explain a little bit about IFS to them and how it works. And yeah, pretty much, jump in. Um, there's, I guess, I was kind of thinking about this, and I was thinking that maybe for other approaches, I know that I'm not as up on all the different modalities as I would have been pre-IFS. It's just that as an IFS therapist, you don't have much need of any other um, theory. But I do. I understand that there are some approaches to trauma that take a staged approach, in terms of how they might work on helping someone to heal their trauma. And a lot of it is geared around safety. So around not, being very careful about how you start addressing things or helping someone to process it. Um, and I guess in IFS that's kind of built into it. It's very much built in the safety aspect or the um, staged aspect, if I put it that way. Um, so what I mean by that is that say I had somebody new that came to see me, and maybe if even if we didn't go in the first session and we went in the second session, I just said to them, well, I really hear that's part of you that's very anxious. How about we, just see if we can find out more about that part. Now, that anxious part might be a really vulnerable part of them, but more typically, it's a protective part of them. So when we first go inside, it is usually protectors that we're going to meet. And that's our safety. What's the word? That's what makes it safe. The system sort of regulates it, if you like, because we want to get the protector's permission before we go any deeper. And so we always have that first line, if you like, that we're working with. Um, and work with protectors can take a very long time, so people might have seen demos of Dick or various other IFS people doing demos, and it may appear very straightforward where you help somebody to focus inside, to speak to a part. They meet one protector, they might meet a second protector, they get that permission from those protectors to go to an exile. They go to the exile and they do some witnessing, and before you know it, the exile is healed. And unfortunately, that's generally not how it works in our everyday IFS therapy. So to give you just an example, I hesitate when I say this, but I do work with a lot of complex trauma clients. And the reason I hesitate is because I think most therapists work with very complex people and work with trauma. Um, and so, I'm thinking of perhaps one client who, for the past couple of years, we've just been working with her protective system. And it's incredibly valuable work. It's already changed a lot in her system, but there can be layers of protectors there. And we really need to be kind of guided by the system, follow the system. There's a certain wisdom inside of us. And, so that's our safety mechanism, if you like. Um,
That's no, that makes a lot of sense, and that's something that I've heard Richard say as well, is that you never ever go to the exiles without first getting permission of the protectors. And if there's been a lot of trauma there will be really intense, maybe quite rigid protectors. So that might take quite a bit of time to get them to relax enough so that you can start doing deeper work, So
yeah, because like, uh, I as an IFS therapist, you have a lot of respect for those protectors because they are the ones that have essentially been keeping the person going, for decades. They're the ones that have been managing everything, helping the person survive. So you have a lot of respect and understanding that these are parts that are not just going to relax and fade away and just let you get in there. They're not just going to trust that, without you taking the time to really build a relationship with them. And when I say that, I mean that as a therapist, you are building a relationship with the client's parts, but you're also helping the client then to build relationship with their parts too. And a lot of parts have been let down by people that should have protected them, so they have great difficulty trusting. And that's what a lot of the work is about, is really gaining the trust of these protectors, of these really hardworking protectors. Um,
Yeah, like for me, it makes so much sense because even if you take this analogy one level up, so imagine that you are dealing with real people in the real world, and let's imagine you were to go into an organization that organization had all these different people working for them, and imagine that organization had been under severe threat for, I don't know, quite a bit of time. It's likely that that building that organization is going to have people there that are like very vigilant, like, they're making sure everything's okay. They're making sure nobody dangerous is getting in and all the rest. So after the danger is past, they're still going to be they're going to be there. They're going to be paranoid. They're still going to be doing their job. And if you wanted to work with that organization and get them to um, maybe start changing, maybe open up a bit, maybe relax a little bit, you're first going to have to get the respect, get the trust of those protector parts within there, and come and do so from a place of trying to build a relationship and a sort of sense of being on the same level rather than going in there from a top down and saying, you have to change, you have to get out of the way. Because anytime we do that in the human world, we always get pushback. The person's like, no, absolutely not. So the same principles apply with people that apply to parts.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really like that analogy. Yeah. It's like I you know, will often have maybe a supervisee that is in the process of really transitioning to IFS. And they might say to me, Gail, I've tried using IFS with this person, but they just don't like it. I just can't get them to do it. And you know, just I hope you can hear there that that person has slipped back into thinking of that client as just one single personality. They've forgotten at that point that they're hearing from a part. It's a part that doesn't like parts work for some reason. So that's a protected part that is doing its job. Um, and that's a part that or that therapist, I need to help that therapist to know that she needs to, befriend that protector. First of all, she needs to see it as a part. And once you see it as a part, that's actually, um, I suppose that in the past you would have referred to that as resistance, so the client was being resistant, as though they were somehow being difficult or non-cooperative but actually that's an important protective part. And in a way, it's kind of testing you as a therapist. It's kind of like, will you be pushed away from them? Will you be pushed, will you give up? Or will you actually try and meet them somehow? And that's, I suppose another example of how everything changes when you, uh, when you really remember that everybody has parts and that basically everything you encounter in therapy is parts.
For sure. And to me, this seems like, just thinking now, like this is like this makes compassion and empathy. so much, and forgiveness so much easier, because you realize that everyone is this complex system of parts, and it's not the whole person that might have done the horrible thing or whatever. And you sort of see, okay, I can understand that that part probably did that for some reason, that maybe something happened 20, 30 years ago that has caused that. And, you know, I think it gives us a deeper understanding of people and allows us to be more compassionate towards behavior that we might not understand otherwise. But anyway, I wanted to ask as well, Gail. So this summit is really focused on attachment, right? And we haven't really got there yet, but I wanted to ask, why can IFS be particularly effective for working with attachment issues and wounds that we might have experienced in early life, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. So I have to admit that previous to IFS, I used to always struggle with attachment theory. Like so many other concepts. Um, for some reason, I would always struggle to keep in mind the different forms of insecure attachment. I would try desperately to keep them in my mind because again, this was part of trying to feel equipped as a therapist. So I would be trying to bear in mind that, okay, perhaps this person has insecure attachment. They are, you see, I'm forgetting the different categories now, but according to a lot of neuroscience research, there would be the thinking that, okay, perhaps this was missing for the person that had disorganized attachment. Um, and in order to maybe build up those neural pathways that were missing, the therapist could maybe be like this with them. You know, could maybe be really attuned and really mirror them. And so I'd really study different books and studies, etc. Uh, really trying to work out how could I be with this person to help them build what was missing, supposedly missing in their brain. And it was all about guesswork, really. Uh, couldn't be sure that anything that I was doing was really working, but I certainly tried. Whereas now I know that that's actually not something that I have to provide for the person. And I also come from a knowing that there is nothing missing in the person. There's nothing missing, there's nothing damaged. Um, and I don't have to be the reparative parent figure. Um, I know that they have self, and I know that my job is to help them develop a relationship with their parts, and that's what's going to give them more self energy. And it's that self to part relationship. That's what we're really focused on. And for me, that's very empowering for the client. Instead of me being held up as I'm somehow the superior expert therapist and I can give you what's missing in you. Whereas I simply don't believe anymore that there's anything missing in any of us.
So, according to IFS, and this is where it differs from most other parts-based therapies, but according to IFS, the self is innate in each person and almost fully developed. And but the problem is that we've all these protector parts that get in the way, that are blended, that are sort of obstructing that. Like I think Richard describes it like it's sort of like on like a rainy day, there's loads of cloud cover, there's thunder, there's lightning, and all the rest. Those are all the parts, but the sun's still there. It's just blocked by all these clouds, you know. So we're sort of saying in IFS, the self is always there, regardless of how bad a state somebody might be in psychologically. But there's just so many things that are obstructing that. Now, what do you think about this? Because this is quite a big claim, you know, because we're, you know, if this is true, we're sort of saying that if somebody has had no social contact, no love, whatever, there's still potential within them for that capacity. Like, what do you think about that?
changes everything, doesn't it? If we're, instead of like many approaches, I guess, uh, that you're taking more of a deficit approach or deficit view of the person, whereas in IFS, um, we we don't see that there's anything missing or damaged. So to say more about that, uh, say if somebody said to me that they felt damaged, as lots of people do, they will say they feel damaged, they feel broken. I am able to say to them, well, actually, no, there's nothing damaged or broken about you. Um, that and I will explain the model to them. I'll explain parts themselves. And what it is that there are exile parts there that are carrying a lot of pain. Um, but that's pain that they can be helped to let go of. And when they let go of that, they can return to their naturally valuable state. But that's what our exiles do, is that they take on the pain of different experiences we've had. They hold it as burdens, and we help them let go of it. That's a big part of our work. But no part is damaged, and self is not damaged either. Um, Same when somebody maybe says to me, as I hear this quite often, and any therapist would hear this, um, I can't feel anything in my body. I've got no feeling in my body. And so I'm saying to them, I hear that. But what I would understand is that you likely have a part that maybe keeps you out of your body or stops you feeling things as a way of trying to protect you. And we just need to speak to the part that does that. And then we can speak to the part and negotiate with the part or parts that do that, help them relax, keep working with all the different parts, and gradually the person is able to feel more of their body, for example. Um,
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And for some reason, as you were speaking there, something came to mind, totally random, but I just thought I'd share this. Um, so I just wonder, you often hear about people having near-death experiences, and when they have this experience, they have a and they come back to life, obviously. They come back with a totally different perspective. Their behavior might completely change. They can almost come back like as a new person, right? And it's almost like maybe when that happens, like all of these different parts sort of there's just like a massive like the waves part and then self just really shines through for that time and the total clarity and they're self-led for that period after the near death experience, maybe that's happening. I don't know.
yeah, I'd certainly be open to that idea because I think anything is possible. Yeah.
um so in your client work, how do you help your clients or even yourself, what do you find most effective for connecting with this self with a capital S? Like, how do you help your clients develop that relationship, would you say?
Yeah. So, um, I actually, as unexpected as it may sound, because self is really the cornerstone of Richard Schwartz's model. I actually don't make too much of a big deal about self, particularly in the beginning of therapy, because a lot of clients can feel a lot of pressure to be in self then, and they can feel very self-critical when they think they're not in self or that they don't have self. Or so I prefer to just do the work of helping them get to know their parts, helping them get into relationship with their parts, knowing that ultimately that's what's going to help them have more space for self. Um, and I also, for the same reason, I guess, I talk more in terms of self energy, or qualities of self, rather than this very big sounding thing that I have to be in self. So, I will often be pointing out to somebody, I can really hear some self energy there. There's that real curiosity or compassion that you're feeling right now, or um, because otherwise it can feel like this unattainable or big thing that either a client or a therapist feels like they need to be in. Um, so along those lines, in terms of what I would do to experience more self, it is all about the parts. It's about um, really trying to notice my parts, to be aware of my parts as I go through my day, as I work. Um, I think that is one thing that really distinguishes IFS from other approaches, among many things. That IFS, yes, it is a very effective therapy approach, but it's also what I feel like I'm teaching my clients is a way of life. So it's not something that just takes place in the therapy room. That what you're actually trying to help somebody to do is basically develop a new way of being with themselves, a lifelong habit of interacting with themselves in a completely different way. Because most of us have grown up to think of ourselves in terms of one person, one personality. So yeah, what I do is I go about my days really just try and notice my parts. And that means any time that I am feeling stressed, I know it's likely one of my managers that's struggling with whatever workload I might have or is struggling to figure something out. Um, I will try and be aware of that part and talk to that part and remind it that I'm here. Um, any other time, if I think I'm noticing a part that feels sad or worried, I'm just trying to notice my parts all the time. That's what's going to give me some self energy.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it's sort of like you're relating to these parts in the same way that a loving parent would relate to their children. A parent that really cared for their children, they would be aware of what's happening with them. They would be tuning into them. They'd be listening to them, and they'd be caring for them whenever they were, stressed out or whatever. That's what we're talking about here.
That is exactly it, and I think Dick Schwartz would say this, that the children that we have on the inside, that we all have on the inside, they require far less attention than the children that we might have, that we might actually have in the outside world. Um, our parts, they are incredibly forgiving of us. They're incredibly appreciative of any time we spend with them, and they really just need to be noticed and acknowledged by us, and sometimes like really actively reassured or helped, or but actually it's not the case that I need to sit down and devote 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the evening to really sit and tune into my parts. It's just an ongoing practice during the day. um I it's funny to think that I used to think that in order to be a good therapist, I had to meditate every day. And I was teaching my clients to meditate as well. Um, and now, of course, I understand that that's essentially it's manager driven. And by that, I mean that um, meditation, mindfulness has become such a big thing because another useful tool that one of our managers can use to focus on. And if it's just doing that, if it's just breathing, watching thoughts pass by, that manager feels a bit more in control. of all these other unruly parts underneath. It gives that manager another tool to manage things. Um, so actually, I'm quite relieved I don't feel I have to meditate every day now.
That's fantastic. And I think there can be such a pressure for people, especially in the space, to have to sort of check all these boxes every day where you meditate, you exercise, you journal. And you're right. Maybe that is often manager behavior, not coming from the self, you know? Um, Now, Gail, I'm aware that you work a lot with the body in therapy as well. And so I wanted to ask, how do you approach this, and how can this be done in, how can bodywork be used in conjunction with IFS, do you think?
Well, so I mean, I could talk about when I was a sensory motor psychotherapist, and at the time that was probably the approach that I felt maybe did the most to contribute towards healing. Um, I have a different take on it now, but maybe if I just stay with IFS for the moment, that there is such a thing now as somatic IFS, and for me, that's something that is redundant, is only going to overcomplicate things for anybody that is trying to learn IFS as a therapist. And I say that because for me, our parts are inherently somatic. So our parts, they don't just live in our minds. There isn't any separation between mind and body. So our parts are their mind and body. And, if you think about it, one of the first things that we do as an IFS therapist when we are following the protocol, um, very, you know, I just want to maybe just really say, Richard Schwartz, I think is what he has done is quite brilliant, and I think it's appreciated by us in the IFS world, but I would hope that one day it will be wider appreciated just what he has done. It is quite incredible. Um, but to go back to the protocol, the first question that we ask on that is, where do you find this part in your body? So when we're trying to help somebody get into a relationship with a part, and we have them focus inside, usually close their eyes just so they can focus on that internal world. And it's, where do you find that part in your body? And most people can find it, unless they have parts that are really keeping them out of their body. And again, that's something we would work with. Um, but most people have no problem. They can find it in their body. Um, so yeah, parts are inherently somatic, and our parts have an extraordinary effect on our body. Um, so it's just automatic for me now that if somebody comes into me and they have a headache, I'm straight away saying, I just wonder if it might be a part that's causing the headache. What do you say we investigate? And we will usually find a part that's causing the headache that we can ask to pull back, and the headache stops. Um, yeah, I would have so many examples of the effect of parts on the body. Um, I there's one person that comes to mind who, she when I first started seeing her, had been discovered to have fibroids, which are growths on her uterus. A lot of women get them, and she was scheduled to have surgery because they were really quite big, and she had really bought into IFS. It was already making such a big difference for her. And it actually came from her that she suggested, I'm just wondering about exploring this as a part that might be causing this. So we found a part that had caused the fibroids. and we asked it why had it done this? And it said that it wanted to draw her attention to, this is what it was trying to do, was draw her attention to all the trauma that she carried, her own trauma, but she also carried a lot of what we would call an IFS legacy burdens. So she's one of many Irish people that had grown up in a very religious household, strongly Catholic, strong messages about women and how they should be, shame about sex. She had a lot of exposure, I won't go into detail, but to the Magdalene laundries. So there was a lot of fear in her young parts that if she did anything wrong, she would end up in one of those institutions. The fibroids was warning her about what she was carrying in her system, all this trauma that actually, a lot of it didn't actually belong to her. It had been picked up. And, that's the IFS equivalent of intergenerational trauma. And we worked with this, and she, the next appointment she had, the consultant didn't know what had happened, but the fibroids had shrunk. And it's now over a year later, and she didn't have to have the surgery. Surgery has not happened. There's no pain anymore. The fibroids are really small. Um, and obviously we're continuing to work with a lot of the shame and but that is the kind of effect that it can have. I think our parts, they have some kind of sense that there's something, maybe a vulnerability in our body, and they will use that vulnerability if they need to in order to get our attention. And it's a theory of mine. I can't know for sure whether it's true, but um, I I believe that's what explains why somebody, might attend a party, for example, and one person gets a cold, one person goes home and they've picked up some kind of virus, and another person doesn't. And I think it's because the person that gets the cold, their parts needed to use that in some way to slow the person down. Um, or, and the other person, their parts didn't need to do that.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah, no, it makes sense. Like there's times of the year, for example, I don't know if it's related or not, but like around Christmas time, I would often get a cold or get really sick. And I think it's like a part of my system. It's like this is like a time to slow down because I'm a very like go, 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 go sort of person, you know?
You have a part, I guess, that's very, very hard work that keeps you on the go, I guess.
Overactive, So I think maybe that there's something similar going on there, which I should probably look into. But anyway, Gail, it's been so fascinating speaking with you today. You've been brilliant. Where can people learn more about you, your work? I think you've got a podcast and you've a good a newsletter as well. Can you maybe share a bit about that?
Yeah, I do a regular podcast now with an IFS colleague of mine, Emma Redfern, and so I do that. I have a website as well, that so people can find me very easily on through Google. I do trainings as well, regularly, workshops. Um, so yeah. Oh, and I'm always very happy to answer any queries or offer any help in relation to IFS, because I I think I would have that in common with Dick, that I really just see what a difference this could make on a wider level. And yeah, I'm just very keen to get as much IFS into the world as I can. So um,
Fantastic. Okay. Well, Gail, it's been a pleasure. I want to wish you all the best going forward and with the work you're doing with IFS and getting it more widely available. So best of luck and we'll talk soon.
thanks very much. Thanks, Niall.